Picture a 7-year-old child tracking mammoth footprints through snow, carrying a sharp stone blade bigger than their hand. They're not playing, they're working. In the Stone Age, children weren't protected from the adult world. They were thrown into it from the moment they could walk. By age 5, most prehistoric kids could start fires, track animals, and identify which plants would kill you. They had to learn fast because childhood itself was a race against death. At Narok in Kenya, archaeologists found proof of just how brutal that race could be. 27 people lay scattered across an ancient shoreline, among them 6 children who never got the chance to grow up. Stone projectile tips were still lodged in their small skulls. Welcome to prehistoric childhood, where making it to your next birthday was never guaranteed. Imagine burying half the children in your community every year. For prehistoric families, this was reality. At Indian Knoll in Kentucky, archaeologists Francis Johnston and Charles Snow examined over 1,200 burials dating back 5,000 years. Their findings were devastating. The site revealed infant mortality rates that would horrify any modern parent. The average lifespan at Indian Knoll was just 18.5 years. Most people died before they could even reproduce. The community was trapped in a cycle where death constantly outpaced birth, where every pregnancy was a gamble against overwhelming odds. Similar patterns emerge wherever archaeologists dig. From European caves to African savannas, the story remains consistent. Childhood was humanity's most dangerous time. At sites across the Mediterranean, researchers found that about half of all prehistoric children died before reaching adulthood. In some locations, the numbers were even worse. Burial grounds filled with tiny skeletons tell the same story over and over. Being young meant being vulnerable. Even our closest relatives faced the same brutal odds. Neanderthal populations, despite their sophisticated tools and social structures, lost children at rates comparable to early humans. Intelligence and planning couldn't guarantee survival when you were small and vulnerable. Walk through any prehistoric burial ground, and you'll see tiny graves everywhere. These weren't isolated tragedies. This was normal life, 10,000 years ago. Spain's Atapuerca caves hide one of archaeology's most disturbing secrets. Deep underground, in a chamber called Gran Dolina, researchers found bones that changed everything we thought we knew about early humans. The bones belonged to Homo antecessor. 11 individuals had died here. Most were children and teenagers. The oldest was maybe 13, but the children hadn't died from disease or accident. Someone had butchered them. Stone tool marks covered the bones, the same precise cuts used to process deer and horses. Skull fragments showed impact points where someone had cracked them open to reach the brain. Long bones were systematically broken for marrow. Every scrap of meat had been stripped away. The butchery was methodical. Researchers found cut marks on 288 bone fragments, evidence of systematic processing that showed clear expertise. The children's bones were broken in exactly the same patterns as animal prey found in the same cave layers. This wasn't desperate cannibalism during a famine. Animal bones from the same layers prove food was abundant. Deer, horses, and other prey animals filled the cave. The early humans had choices. They chose to hunt children. Dr. Palmira Saladi spent years analyzing the remains. Her conclusion was chilling. The butchery showed expertise. The people weren't fumbling through their first act of cannibalism. They knew exactly what they were doing. The targeting of young people suggests something even darker. Kill the adults and you eliminate immediate threats. Kill the children and you wipe out the future. No next generation means no revenge. No competition down the line. Evidence suggests this wasn't a one-time event. Multiple layers at the site show similar patterns of human consumption, indicating that hunting and eating other humans had become part of their regular behavior. It was cultural, not desperate. It's a level of calculated brutality that's hard to comprehend. Deeper in the Atapuerca cave system lies another chamber. Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, contains over 7,000 fossils from at least 28 early humans who lived 430,000 years ago. Hidden among the ancient remains, archaeologists found something extraordinary. The bones of a child with craniosynostosis, a severe birth defect that fuses skull bones prematurely. This condition creates massive pressure on the developing brain. The child's head would have looked obviously different from birth. In the prehistoric world, such differences usually meant death. Children born with visible disabilities rarely survived. They couldn't contribute to group survival. They needed constant care. They used precious resources that healthy children required. But this child lived. The bones show growth beyond infancy. Someone in the ancient community decided this different child deserved protection. They fed, sheltered, and cared for a vulnerable individual who gave nothing back except their humanity. 500,000 years ago, in one of the world's harshest environments, compassion won out over calculation. Fast forward to 10,000 years ago. The Ice Age is ending. Humans have spread across the globe. Surely by now, we'd learn to protect our children. Lake Turkana in Kenya tells a different story. Dr. Marta Mirazon Lar and her team uncovered remains that paint a picture of systematic violence. 27 people had been killed in what appears to be a planned raid. The attackers came prepared. They carried weapons not used for hunting animals. Multiple types of clubs. Arrows designed for killing humans. Stone blades that could slice through flesh and bone. 6 children died in this attack. Most were under 6 years old. 1 teenager fought alongside the adults. Families perished together, parents unable to save their youngest members from attackers who showed no mercy. Several bodies lay in position suggesting their hands had been tied. A pregnant woman was found bound and killed. The attackers took no prisoners. They buried no bodies. 27 people were left where they fell, food for scavengers. The obsidian blades embedded in some skulls came from hundreds of miles away. This wasn't a spontaneous fight between neighboring groups. Someone had traveled vast distances, carrying specialized weapons, planning mass murder. Children weren't collateral damage in this massacre. They were targets. But not every prehistoric child faced violence. Some communities made choices that seem almost impossible to believe. Sunghir, Russia, 34,000 years ago. 2 boys lie head-to-head in an elaborate grave. They're covered in mammoth ivory beads, over 10,000 of them. Each bead took about an hour to make. Do the math. Someone spent 10,000 hours creating decorations for the children. 16 ivory spears surround their bodies. Some are over 7 feet long, carved from straightened mammoth tusks. 300 fox teeth create intricate patterns across their clothing. 20 ivory armbands circle their arms. A healthy adult man from the same site was buried with 3,000 beads and basic grave goods. The children received 3 times more wealth than a productive adult. Why? Because they needed it. The younger boy had severely bowed legs and stunted growth. The older showed signs of muscle weakness and facial deformities. Both had experienced repeated periods of extreme stress, visible in their teeth as lines that formed during malnutrition or illness. The children weren't healthy kids who died tragically young. They were disabled kids who required constant care. Yet their community invested unimaginable wealth in their burial. Someone valued the vulnerable lives enough to create monuments that still amaze us 34,000 years later. Eric Trinkhaus, who studied the remains, put it simply: the children had status that went far beyond anything they could have earned in a decade of life. Their community chose to honor difference instead of eliminating it. Iraq's Shanidar Cave reveals another side of our ancient relatives. Between 45,000 and 75,000 years ago, Neanderthals used this cave as shelter. When they died, their communities sometimes buried them with a parent ceremony. Shanidar I lived an extraordinary life. Sometime in his youth, disasters struck repeatedly. A blow to his head likely blinded his left eye. His right arm was so badly damaged it may have been amputated. Fractures to his feet would have left him limping. Deafness cut him off from normal communication. In most prehistoric societies, such injuries meant death. You couldn't hunt, fight, or even flee from danger effectively. But Shanidar I lived to be about 45 years old, ancient by Paleolithic standards. Someone fed him for decades, protected him from predators and enemies, helped him navigate a world designed for the able-bodied. Ralph Selecki, who excavated the cave in the 1950s, found clear evidence of intentional burial. The bodies weren't simply people who had died in the cave. Neanderthal communities were making conscious decisions about how to treat their dead. Shanidar III tells another story of survival against odds. A spear point had pierced his chest, probably puncturing his lung. The wound shows signs of healing, meaning he lived for months after being injured. Again, someone provided care during his recovery. The Neanderthals understood something profound. The value of life extended beyond immediate usefulness. Czech Republic, 26,000 years ago. 3 young people were buried together at Dolní Věstonice in a grave that still puzzles archaeologists. 2 were healthy males in their prime. The third was obviously different. Severe spinal curvature, shortened and bowed bones, multiple developmental disorders that would have been visible from birth and caused chronic pain. Recent DNA analysis revealed all three were male, not a male-female pair as originally thought. They weren't closely related by blood, despite sharing some physical characteristics. This was a social grouping, not a family burial. The disabled individual lay between the other two, suggesting special significance rather than casual inclusion. Someone had made deliberate choices about how to arrange these bodies, and the different child wasn't hidden or marginalized. This burial represents something remarkable. A prehistoric community that included rather than excluded, that honored difference rather than eliminating it. Archaeological evidence from the broader site shows these weren't desperate people struggling for survival. They created sophisticated art, including the famous Venus figurine. They had successful hunting strategies and trade networks extending to the Mediterranean. They could have easily abandoned disabled members. Instead, they chose inclusion. Beyond human violence, prehistoric children faced constant environmental dangers. Climate could change rapidly and catastrophically. Volcanic eruptions blocked sunlight for years. Droughts dried up water sources. Floods destroyed food supplies. Children were especially vulnerable during crises. They couldn't travel far or fast. They needed more water relative to their size. They couldn't survive long without food. When resources became scarce, families faced impossible choices. Who eats when there isn't enough food? Who gets carried when the group must move quickly? Who receives medicine when supplies are limited? Disease struck without warning or mercy. A simple infection could kill. Broken bones that would heal easily today became death sentences. Parasites weakened already malnourished children. Dental evidence from sites like Dolny Viestonis reveals repeated episodes of stress, horizontal lines in tooth enamel form during periods of malnutrition or severe illness. Most prehistoric children's teeth show multiple stress lines, evidence of lives punctuated by crisis. The development of farming around 10,000 years ago brought new challenges. Permanent settlements meant closer contact with human waste and contaminated water. Domestic animals introduced new diseases. Population density allowed epidemics to spread rapidly. Today's technology lets scientists read life stories from old bones with amazing detail. Chemical tests show what people ate and where they lived. Growth patterns show if children got enough care. Stress marks in teeth document times of crisis. CT scanning lets researchers look inside bones without damaging them. Chemical tests can tell when children stopped nursing, identify times of starvation, and even spot specific diseases. These tools show huge differences in how prehistoric kids lived. Some communities clearly put children first. Others didn't seem to care much about young lives. Sites like Sungkir and Dolny Viestonis prove some prehistoric people were already making smart moral choices about including and caring for others. They spent precious resources on people who couldn't help with survival, but represented hope for the future. Lorna Tilley studies what she calls the archaeology of care, looking at how ancient people helped weak members of their groups. Her research has found amazing examples of prehistoric kindness that challenge our assumptions about ancient life. A 4,000-year-old skeleton from Vietnam shows a condition that causes spinal problems and paralysis. The person lived into their 20s despite needing constant help in a community where people often went hungry. Someone fed, bathed, and protected this individual for years, gaining nothing in return except the satisfaction of doing what was right. A 6,000-year-old baby in Brazil with severe bone disease was buried with rich goods, including jewelry and decorative beads. Treatment usually saved for important adults. The community clearly saw value in this vulnerable life that went beyond practical considerations. At Border Cave in South Africa, researchers found evidence of a child who survived despite severe physical limitations. Bone analysis shows the individual received specialized care, including modified food that was easier to digest, and evidence of being carried when the group moved. The Romito Cave in Italy yielded the skeleton of a teenage dwarf who lived around 11,000 years ago. Despite obvious physical differences and limited mobility, this individual survived to adolescence and was buried with apparent ceremony. Some communities chose to protect and honor their weakest members, proving that compassion has ancient roots in human society. Agriculture changed childhood in complex ways. For the first time, children could do meaningful work. Farming communities could use young workers in ways hunter-gatherers couldn't. A 5-year-old could help plant seeds, weed gardens, and watch for pests. Children could tend smaller animals like chickens or goats. They could help with food processing, grinding grain, making bread, preparing vegetables for storage. Their labor became valuable to family survival in new ways. But permanent towns also brought more disease. Closer contact between humans and animals brought new germs. Pigs, cattle, and chickens carried diseases that could jump to humans. When lots of people lived together, sickness could spread quickly through communities. Archaeological evidence from early farming villages shows higher rates of infectious diseases like tuberculosis and malaria. Parasites became more common when human waste accumulated near living areas. Water sources became contaminated more easily. Evidence from early farming sites shows more children were born, but also more children died from infectious diseases. Communities were making a trade-off: more kids born, but also more kids lost to disease. The shift to agriculture also created new forms of inequality. Some families accumulated more resources than others. Children from wealthy farming families had better access to food and protection, while poor children faced new forms of exploitation and neglect. Child labor became more systematic. Instead of learning survival skills through play and observation, children were put to work in fields and workshops. Some societies began treating children as economic assets rather than individuals deserving protection. Comparing sites from different times and places shows huge differences in how prehistoric people treated children. Some clearly put child safety first. Others didn't seem to care much about young lives. The care shown at sites like Cima de los Huesos, where dozens of people got similar help, is very different from the violence at Grandolina, where people lived, what resources they had, and their cultural choices all played roles in how kids were treated. Every bone discovery adds pieces to a big puzzle. The bones tell us clearly. Growing up in prehistoric times was often harsh, sometimes short, but sometimes marked by amazing kindness. The children killed at Nataruk remind us that planned violence against kids has old roots. The children eaten at Grandolina show that humans have long been able to treat other humans like animals. But the rich burials at Sungkyur and the care shown to disabled people at many sites prove that compassion and protection of the weak are just as old. Dr. Mirazon Lar said it best. What we see in prehistoric sites is no different from the conflicts and kindness that still happen in our world today. The bones of prehistoric children connect us to people who lived unimaginably long ago. They faced challenges we can barely picture, yet sometimes made choices that seem very modern. The decision to care for a disabled child 430,000 years ago shows the same thinking that drives how we help disabled people today. The fancy burial of sick children 34,000 years ago shows people valued others for who they were, not what they could do. These weren't aliens making weird choices. These were humans like us, with the same ability to be cruel or kind, making decisions about how to treat their weakest members. Looking at the tiny bones of prehistoric children in museums, you see the real story of our past. These small skeletons show us both the worst and best of what humans can do. The brutal truth of prehistoric childhood makes today's safe childhoods seem like miracles. Every child who grows up now beats odds that would have killed most kids in the past. These bones teach us something important. Protecting children isn't something that just happens naturally. It's a choice people have to make over and over again. Some ancient groups made that choice. Others didn't. That difference shows up in the bones we find today, reminding us that humans have always had the power to choose kindness or cruelty.